Hi, I'm sitting in my backyard surrounded by fruit trees, flowers, cats, birds, and those huge books. And this is because today the subject of my interest is biblical Edomites. This is what the Bible tells us about the first encounter between Israelites and Edomites. From Kadesh, Moses sent messengers to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel. And then it continues. Allow us then to cross your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, and we will not drink water from wells. We will follow the king's highway, turning off neither to the right nor to the left, until we have crossed your territory. But Edom answered him, You shall not pass through us, else we will go out against you with a sword. It sounds like they started off on the wrong foot. Later the Bible tells us that King David conquered Edom. Then Edom became vassals of Judah. Then they fought for their freedom and they regained it. Then they lost it again. But what else do we know about Edomites? Who were they? What did they do? What did they believe? I'm Irene Orleansky, a musician, filmmaker, and researcher in the field of Israel studies. I'm inviting you to a little journey, and I hope that by the end of this journey you will learn something new or interesting about biblical Edomites. So let's go. I'm starting really early because it's going to be a really long ride. We're heading to the most southern part of Israel. We have reached southern part of the Arabah desert. In biblical times, it was part of the land of Edom. Edom means red in Hebrew. According to the Hebrew Bible, Edomites were descendants of Jacob's brother Esau, who was red-headed. But if you look at these mountains, another explanation comes to mind. We are in Timna, in the southern part of the Arabah desert. Up there, you can see a rock inscription in ancient Egyptian script. Pharaohs of Egypt referred to Edomites as Shasu of Edom. Shasu is how Egyptians called Semitic nomadic tribes. This is the temple dedicated to Egyptian goddess Hathor. There are debates over when it was built, during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II, Ramses III, or later. It was destroyed, probably in an earthquake, and a Semitic-type tented desert shrine was built instead. Timna was a copper production site since ancient times. The researchers suggest that in late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, copper mining in Southern Aravah was operated by the Egyptian New Kingdom, with seasonal expeditions to Timna. But most of the copper production activity was from the 11th till 9th century BC. It was initiated and operated by a local semi-nomadic tribal society, perhaps biblical Edom. Why Edom? Because similar typical archaeological remains were discovered in Iron Age Feinan, a major copper production site on the Jordanian plateau, where later Edomite cities and settlements were established. I'm at the observation deck in Eilat, the most southern town in Israel. From here, I can see Eilat, and on the other side, closer to the mountains, Aqaba in Jordan. The Bible tells us that King Solomon's ships used to sail from Etzion Geber near Eilat. It also tells us that later Eilat was conquered by Aram. Then it was recovered by a king of Judah, and then conquered by Aram again. And that's when Edomites began settling in Eilat. But don't let the modern names confuse you, because biblical Eilat is not located on the territory of today's Eilat, but rather closer to Aqaba in today's Jordan. In 1938, Nelson Glueck, an American archaeologist, discovered a fortress dated to the 8th century BC at Tell-el-Khaleifeh near Aqaba. He identified it with biblical Etzion Geber. Later, more biblical period sites were excavated in Jordan, including al-Biara in Petra and Busayra that preserve the name of the biblical capital of Edom, Botzra. At these sites, archaeologists discovered objects unique to the geographical region of biblical Edom. Painted pottery of unique style, later called Edomite pottery. Inscriptions on pottery shreds and seals in a script similar to Hebrew, but with some letters written in a different manner. It became known as Edomite script. Seal impressions bearing the name of Edomite national deity Kos and Edomite kings also known from Assyrian sources. Fragments of figurines. The figurines were difficult to interpret because of their poor preservation state, until some breakthrough discoveries made in Israel. This is Tel En Hazeva archaeological site, identified with biblical Tamar. When you drive here from Jordan, it takes a long time because of the detour created by the modern borders. But if you look in the straight line, it's just a few kilometers from Basra. Here in the 90s, archaeologists discovered a favisa, an underground treasury with Edomite cultic objects in the open-air shrine. The objects were broken, most probably during Josiah's religious reforms in the end of the 7th century BC, mentioned in the Book of Kings. King Josiah ordered all pagan cultic objects to be destroyed. This is not the only Edomite cultic site discovered in Israel. Earlier, in the 80s, an Edomite temple was discovered in Kitmit in the Negev. We can see some of the objects discovered in Tel En Hazeva in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Most of the objects are human figurines in the form of cylindrical stand. Similar stands were discovered at several sites in Jordan. It is not clear whether they represent gods or worshippers. However, some of the figurines had symbolic features, such as this figurine with the horns from Kitmit. The horns clearly indicate that the statue did not represent a human. Another symbolic figure is that of a sphinx, reflecting the style of Transjordan terracotta figurines and Ammonite stone statues. In addition to human statues, in Kitmit, many animal figurines were discovered. The bull and the ostrich were the most abundant. The bull is attributed with the role of the Edomite national deity Kos, or the weather god. It was suggested that En Hazeva shrine served as a temple for traders on their way from Edom to the Negev. And perhaps it was true about Kitmit in the Negev too. But the thing is that Edomite cultic objects were discovered not only at Kitmit Temple, but also in towns of Sheva and Arad Valley, such as this double flute player discovered in Tel Malchata. More than that, the chemical analysis proves that the objects in Kitmit Temple and in Tel Malchata were created at the same place, perhaps by the same artisan. And how do we know that these objects belong to Edomites and not to Judahites? Well, the truth is that at that time many Judahites still worshipped idols, but their figurines were totally different in theme and in style. The most popular were so-called pillar figurines. Some researchers suggest that they represented Asherah, a Canaanite goddess worshipped as God's wife or consort. Many other archaeological findings indicate that Edomites lived in the Beersheba and Arad valleys alongside Judahites. Perhaps because it was the frontier and it was along the trade route. All kinds of people settled in the southern part of Judean kingdom. A 7th-6th century BC ostrakhan found in Horvat Uza in the Arad Valley was written in Edomite script and contained a blessing by Kos, the god of Edomites. Edomite pottery was also found at numerous sites in the Negev in southern Judah. Interestingly, the chemical analysis shows that some types were made of local clay, but in distinctive Edomite style, while others were imported from the Edomite center in Transjordan. The fact that Edomites created and imported their own type of pottery shows that preserving their ethnic identity was important to them. We are in ancient Arad, in the Arad Valley. The biblical books of Kings tell us about how Edomites rebelled against Judah's rule, regained their independence, and then lost it again. The Arad Ostraka, letters written on pottery shreds in the 7th century BC by Eliashib, the commander of the fortress, support biblical descriptions of tense relations between Edom and Judah. Behold, I have sent to warn you today. Get the men to Elisha, lest Edom should come there. In this episode, we have learned that in the beginning, Edomites were nomadic or semi-nomadic people. They operated copper production in Timna and in Feinan. Later on, they settled down and began building their towns and fortresses in Transjordan. And their capital was Botzra in today's Jordan. Later on, at least some of the Edomites migrated further to the north, to the southern part of Judah, and they lived among Jews. They had their own writing and pottery style, and they had their temples, where they worshipped their national god Kos. So what was the fate of biblical Edomites? The truth is, we don't really know. But we have some clues. One of such clues can be found in the book of the Maccabees. In one of the portions that tells us about one of the military campaigns, it says, "But Judah made war on the sons of Isa in Idumea at Akrabatene." We don't know where exactly Akrabatene was, but we know that during the Hellenistic period, Idumea was a province in the Sheva region on the foothills of the Judean mountains. And we know that according to the Bible, Isa was the ancestor of the Edomites. The landscape of the Sheva is very different. Maresha, or Maresha in Hebrew, was the capital of Idumea. Here many Hellenistic burial caves were discovered. Many of the names of the tombs had the name of Kos in them, such as Kosados, Kosbanos, and Kosnatanos. Another clue can be found in the work of Josephus Flavius, Antiquities of the Jews. He's telling us about a person named Costobarus, whom King Herod the Great made a governor of Idumea and Gaza, and even gave him his sister Salome to wife. Costobarus was an Edomean by birth, and one of principal dignity among them, and one whose ancestors had been priests to the Kos, whom the Idumeans had formerly esteemed as a god. Some researchers suggest that Edomites were pushed from Edom to the Judean mountains by the expanding Arab Nabatean tribes. King Herod himself was a descendant of the Nabateans on his mother's side and Edomeans on his father's side, those who were forcibly converted into Judaism by the Judean Hasmonean king Yohanan Hyrcanus. After the Romans took control of Judea, they allowed all forcibly converted peoples to return to their religion, and some did, but Edomeans chose to remain Jews. With time, Edomeans mixed and assimilated with the rest of the Jewish people. So, if the theory that Edomeans are the descendants of biblical Edomites is correct, it means that we, the Jews, carry Edomite genes. I hope you enjoyed this little journey, and if you did, please subscribe to my channel. See you next time.